So tell us about the cars that you got right behind you.
The cars I have behind me are a 78 Z28 Camaro and a 66 Ford Mustang GT350.
So,
Oh,
yeah, show us the
G-
cars.
GT350,
Mhm.
kind of. And Camaro's behind me.
Yeah, that one looks pretty. Alrighty. So, uh, for the Four Widows, the script was written because one of our producers was gifted a 1972 Buick Electra. Do you
Okay.
know anything about that car and why that could be significant to maybe the 1970s or just the car industry in general?
Well, the 72 Buick Electra is a giant boat of a car. If she has it, you know it to be true. It was kind of the next step down from a Cadillac. So
Okay.
they were both considered luxury cars. The Electra was just weighed a ton, had a big old motor in it, something like a 455 or something, just tons of horsepower, but it had to propel all that metal and stuff. So in its day, it was a nice car. Again, most people had Cadillacs, but if you couldn't afford a Cadillac, you went with the Buick Electra.
Okay, cool. So I also know you said, it's one of those bigger cars. A lot of 70s or older cars are kind of big, like have the big back seats. We actually went to a Bob's Big Boy car show and saw mostly a lot of 1960s cars there. But basically you see like this kind of boxy thing where today we have more rounded cars. What why do you think we went away from the big box kind of thing?
Well, the big thing that we went away from is steel. The cars back in the 60s and 70s were metal. And the cars today, a lot of them are plastic, carbon fiber. They're a lot lighter today. But back in the 70s, you again, that's why they rusted away. Today, you just have a lot of plastic and they're lighter. More computer technology today. Back then, you just mashed it and go.
Bash didn't go.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that you were probably like 10 or 11 in the 1970s, right? Or
Well, 72, I was 10.
uh,
So I remember the late 60s and early 70s. And then when I got my car, we were using the cars from the late 60s and early 70s. So we were using muscle cars. Uh, 70s, there was a lot of transition during the 70s. Back in the day, I'm really happy that I grew up with the first generation of muscle cars because they were um, big, loud, and fast. That's what they were. And then we modified them from there. And so those older cars we can work on. The muscle cars of today, you have to be a computer whiz to understand how to work on those. But we had big cars. Gas was, 25 to 40 cents a gallon. And then the oil embargo hit, and the government got involved with gas regulations and gas rationing, and the cost of gas, oh my God, went up over $1 a gallon.
oh
And
wow.
so anybody who had a muscle car uh, was thought of as someone who didn't care about the environment or the crisis we were in. And as a teenager growing up, I didn't.
I mean, that is kind of the idea of the rebellious teen. You don't really care too much about what's going on around you, just your own personal life.
We were
Right.
street racing at the time. We didn't care.
Oh my gosh. So gas rationing, that's something that I've never experienced. What was that? Why was that a thing?
Okay, this would have been during the mid 70s.
Mhm.
And there was a gas crisis because the oil producing countries in the Middle East restricted the amount of oil that was made available to the rest of the world. And so the cost of oil went up, and we had to ration gas to cars. And so we had gas lines and stuff. And it was politically motivated. Again, they had all the oil producing overseas, and we had next to little here in the U.S. And so we had to bow down to what the foreign countries were demanding of us. And so it caused some issues here in the US, but mostly it shot the cost of gas up is what it did.
So something we've experienced pretty recently, and something that we're noticing in a lot of our research is a lot of the issues that happened or started in the 70s of people noticing things such as gas emissions, is also something that's relevant today. Gas prices shot up then, gas prices just recently shot up here as well. So is there, like, what is the difference now versus then? And the
Well,
reasoning.
nowadays, again, it's still a lot of it's political, some of it's environmental. I think we can produce more gas domestically and we need to. And it's already been proven that if we produce our gas and oil domestically, the cost of living goes down.
Right.
So, and again, it's always been a fight between the environmentalists and consumers. That hasn't changed. It was the same thing back in the 70s. But I think we have to get real, and there's a reality that needs to be looked at as far as, what people need to survive.
Mhm.
And whether you drill for oil in the Middle East or in the US, it's going to have the exact same impact on the environment. So to invest overseas in oil producing really doesn't make any sense, and it didn't back then either. The difference is now we have a say in the game. And at one point, we used to export oil, and now we're oil dependent again. So again, without going political on you,
Yeah.
but again, back in the day, I mean, the 70s was a time of transition. We were coming out of Vietnam War, having to deal with the energy crisis. We had our issues, but we managed and we survived.
So, that's pretty interesting to hear from your perspective because you did get to grow up in the 70s, and there's something that's interesting for us is so I'm probably the youngest in our production group of people. There's about a 10-year difference into all of us, and we actually just interviewed well, when we went to the Bob's Big Boy car show, we actually talked with somebody who has a Shelby Cobra.
Yeah,
Uh
yep, that's a
yeah,
nice one.
yeah, and he was talking to us about the 70s cars and why 70s cars, we're not going to see a lot of 70s cars at these classic car shows because they're not really a collector's item because there was that start of that of the gas emissions and trying to save the environment. Is Do you share the same opinion? Do you think that 70s cars are still classic cars and worth collecting? Or
Well, right, the classic. There's a few cars from the 70s that are still classics. I mean, even your Buick Electra
mhm,
in fair condition right now. I believe I saw it selling for $8,000. That's what you would have paid for a brand new one. If you find them in extremely concours condition, they're up to around $20,000. So they're still collectible. It just
mhm,
depends on what people want to collect. And so typically what we find as far as muscle cars and collector cars is people tend to look for the early 70s, anything from probably 74 to 70, because those still had the big motors in them, produced a lot of horsepower. Um, it's just a perfect example is what they did to the Mustang back in the 60s and early 70s. It was cram as much horsepower as you could into the thing. And then when the oil embargo came out, they came out with a thing called the Mustang 2, which looked mean, but had this itty bitty motor in it. And a lot of the muscle cars got thrown into a 6 cylinder instead of an 8 cylinder. And so those who are serious collectors, they want those old time muscle cars, what we call mostly Gen 1 muscle cars. And that's
one.
anything from like 1964 to 1972
Mhm.
is generally the most collectible as far as the muscle car era goes.
And you obviously you said you had one of your first cars was the early 70s. What was your first car? You remember?
Uh, a Cutlass, which was a really
Cutlass.
nice car, right? It kind of looked like a Chevy Chevelle. Nice car, fast car, fun car, 8 cylinder. But my dad taught me how to drive on an old 1960s, some type of a Ford, because he was a Ford guy,
Uh-huh.
thinking, and probably a Falcon or something like that. But it was Three on the Tree. So I challenge you to go out and see if you can find anybody who knows what Three on a Tree is.
Yeah, what is three on a tree?
Three on a tree is everybody's used to the on a manual transmission being on the floor, whether it's a 3 speed or a 4 speed, but it's a floor shifter. Mine was up on the column, and so it was a whole different set of challenges. And then my dad had to teach me how to run a manual transmission on hills and stuff, and so it was quite the adventure. But my first driving experience was with my dad on some old 60s Ford with Three on the Tree. And then I was fortunate enough for my first car was a Cutlass, which was a fairly nice car. But we had Camaros back then, and Trans Ams were popular. Obviously, the Challengers and the Chargers. I mean, it was a great time to have a car. And
Yeah.
as a teenager, and growing up in the mid and late 70s, we had a blast.
Yeah. Cars back then also had a large personality. Even the cars behind you, you look at them and you're like, that's a car. That is its own entity. Today, you're just like, yeah, that's a black rectangle. And it has a T on it, which means it's a Tesla. Or, there's just not as much personality in the cars anymore.
Well,
Um,
we were interested in the lines of the car, the body lines. It's like even today when I go look at cars to flip, I will look at the body lines of the car to make sure everything lines up properly and stuff. So yeah, they have a personality, they have a look, um, and that's what makes them fun. A lot of people name their cars and stuff, and again, it was just a fun time to grow up and have a car.
Yeah. You said you go and you look at cars to flip, and we haven't really talked about why you're here. So please tell us a little bit about American Muscle Cars for sale and what you do and why we have you on here as an expert.
Right. Well, American Muscle Cars for You is the fundraising arm of Midwest Animal Assisted Therapy and Education Organization. But
Mhm.
one of the ways we do our fundraising is we'll flip muscle cars and collector cars, and then the net proceeds goes to help us provide service dogs to veterans and mental health services to our community through animal assisted activities. And then we also do car shows. We actually have a car show championship season this year. We're doing probably 6 to 10 car shows, and then we'll have a season championship at the end of the year. And it's the first in this area of anything like that. So it's been well received, and we continue to have more and more car show up at our car shows here in the Quad Cities and across the Midwest.
And you have a car show coming up here in May here soon, right? When's that?
We got a big weekend coming up here in May, and I think it's the first time this has ever happened. We're working with the Quad City Cruisers. We're going to do a cruise in on Friday night from 5 to 8 at South Park Mall, and then we're actually holding a car show on that next Saturday from 10 to 2. And then on Sunday, the SCCA, and it's the Great River Region, is going to do their autocross on Sunday. So you can cruise in on Friday, show your car on Saturday, and then race it on Sunday. And it's the first time that's ever happened here. And we're excited to be a part of it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, my Camaro is going to be racing on Sunday.
Yeah, are you going to be the one driving it?
Of course, I'm going to be the one driving it. So I've got my official racing helmet. It's already
Yeah.
been SCCA inspected. So my Camaro is my race car. My Mustang's my show car.
Okay, so both of those cars, those are yours. Neither of them are for sale. No one could convince you otherwise.
Well, again, everything has a price, but it's going to take a heck of a price to get these out of my hands. So I like these two cars. I love my Gen 1 Mustang. I mean, that's what started it as far as pony cars go.
Mhm.
My Camaro is what I would have had in high school. It's a 78 Z28, but it's kind of a hybrid. It's got a 1979 paint job, and then the coupe end of it is 1980. So this car represents my high school years, 78, 79, and 80. And so this one's staying with me. Plus, it's got a Gen 1 motor, 4 speed manual transmission, posi traction. It's designed to race.
Yeah, yeah, you look so excited about it too. And you sent me a picture of the car like racing on a track, and I assume that's you in the car
That's
racing,
right.
right? So,
Absolutely.
oh my goodness. All right, you got to be safe out there, okay? Can't have your car crashing and anything like that, okay?
Again, we dodge cones instead of other cars, so it's autocross. It's just timed against you, against the timer and stuff. But
Okay.
there's other cars in my division. It's a lot of fun, and again, just gives me a chance to go back and tear it up like we used to.
Yeah. So you said that this American Car Muscle Cars for You is a way to fundraise for Midwest Animal Assisted Therapy and Education, which helps fund service animals for veterans. And being the 1970s and the Vietnam War, and actually we were talking with a couple women who grew up in the 1970s and talking about veterans that would come back and either didn't really have jobs or like just issues that would come up. What issues are veterans facing today that you guys are able to help with?
Well, the biggest one is we do work with a lot of Vietnam veterans and stuff. And unfortunately, PTSD is a big issue now as far as mental health and psychological disabilities. Everybody knows about the physical disabilities. If somebody has an issue, whether they were shot or dealt with an explosive device and are missing a limb or whatever, physical disabilities are always taken care of through the VA. However, psychological disabilities are not, and they don't provide funds for service dogs for veterans who suffer from PTSD. The VA just started to do a study to see if service dogs even help for people with PTSD. However, the University of Purdue already did a study, and we know that they do. And so we decided to, again, cut through the red tape, start providing service dogs to all veterans, just as long as they have a qualified disability, we'll get them that service dog that they need. And we've had a number of veterans who reached out and asked for help, and we're more than happy to help.
Awesome. And how much does that usually cost to get a veteran a service dog?
Well, typically, the traditional way is you would go to a organization that breeds dogs and raises dogs and trains dogs. We tend to do things a little differently. We find out what the veteran actually needs as far as uh, what the tasks are that the dog needs to be trained to do. And then, especially with PTSD, we find that shelter dogs work quite well. The biggest thing that we have to make sure is that when that dog and that veteran go out in the community, that they're safe and
Mhm.
that the veteran can control the dog. And when some people just surrender their pets, some of them have been obedience trained, and that's about 90% of what these dogs need to be able to do in order to go out in the public. So a lot of that work's already been done. Plus, we're able to help rehome them, and actually, we give that dog and that veteran a new purpose by bringing them together. And so it really helps and it's beneficial. Back in the 70s, the Vietnam War was huge. We used to watch the news to watch the casualty reports and stuff like that. It was a big part of growing up in the 70s.
And being that you obviously were a kid then, how did that really affect you? And like, were you aware of what was going on and what it meant?
Right. Well, the Vietnam War was very real to me and our family because my uncle was in Vietnam and he was a Green Beret. And he was over there for quite a while. And so we were always concerned. He came home from war and was injured over there. So we were very much aware of what Vietnam was all about. For me, I've always had to deal with something with the war, whether it was my uncle being in Vietnam, and then later in the late 70s and early 80s when I was in college, I actually became a tutor for a lot of the Vietnam refugees that came over. And so I helped with that here at the community college and tutoring them in some of the things that they were in school for. And now today, I work with Vietnam vets for uh, disability purposes, whether it's a physical or emotional disability. So Vietnam has been extremely real to me,
Mhm.
and I've been basically living with it all my life.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting because I knew you tutored, but I didn't know you tutored veteran refugees. So
Right,
I
well, again,
still am learning
they,
new things about you all the time.
right. They basically, at the end of the war, there was a lot of refugees, and some of the GIs had married Vietnamese girls and stuff, and so they all had to come back,
Hmm.
and their families and stuff, and so there was an influx of Vietnamese people here in the U.S. and here in the Quad Cities, late '70s, early '80s.
Okay, very cool. So veterans and cars and animals, how does that all combine together for you? Because those are like three, like the cars and the veterans, that kind of makes sense, and then the veterans and the animals, and then you bring that all together, and you're like, wow. So how did that come into your
Right. For me,
brain?
it's well, and again, for me, it's the perfect storm. Well, and
Hmm.
again, the veterans can relate too, because back in the '60s, they would take Mustangs, souped up Mustangs,
Hmm.
over to show off to the veterans. And when they came back from Vietnam, they had money, and so a lot of them would buy these muscle cars and stuff. And so it was fun for them.
Hmm.
So again, it goes back to when I was growing up, always being around these types of cars, which was fun.
Hmm.
Again, the veterans, our family has had a lot of people involved in the military. My dad, my uncle, my sons, all in the military. So
Hmm.
we've always had that affiliation with them. And with the animals, it's clear back when I started back in the '70s.
Hmm.
Again, access to animals was a lot different back then. You didn't have all of the regulations. There used to be a catalog. The Stromberg's catalog would come out every year,
Hmm.
and you could buy jaguarundis, you could buy lions, you could buy anything. That was just the way it was back then.
Right.
And so my family loved animals. My grandmother always had a dog. My uncle, um, again, we were very much out in the woods a lot. And so as I got older, being able to start a few of my own companies, uh, being able to help veterans and nonprofits, this is probably the perfect melting of helping veterans, being able to play with my muscle cars, and still working with animals to benefit people.
Awesome. Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Now, we will definitely be supporting you guys during your big car show this weekend, this May, in the Quad Cities, right? Uh,
May 26th, 27th, and 28th now.
Awesome. And we ourselves, so the reason we're interviewing you is because we are Four Widows. It's a feature film written, and we are going live on Hourglass 24 on June 1st to start the campaign for funding to make the film, which will involve a 1972 Buick Electra. So,
Have fun with that one. You could probably put all the money you need to raise inside that Buick Electra. It's so big.
well, that would be a fun picture to try and take, but
Right,
uh,
fill the Buick Electra, and then you'll be able to make your movie.